Part of the problem is a lot of those things happen and they look at it, the boys that are involved in it are always looking for a money mark. Well, they're looking for a quick payday instead of longevity. And what happens is that affects the boys. Whoever starting if a new project, they're getting the first kickback and making all the money, and then they try to make it look like they're doing something and nothing happens, but they get a payday out of it. So it's very shallow-minded instead of longevity.
Hi, everybody. It's another week, and it's another time to step back in ring on the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. Each and every week, Casey Thompson, the man to my right, and your host here, Kevin Kelly, we sort of segue in and out of stories, and we talk about our journey in professional wrestling. Casey is one of the busiest and most frequently seen enhancement talents throughout the early 90s. Casey, approximately how many matches did you have that were where you were already in ring when the music began to play?
It has to be somewhere in the 200, more than that. It was quite a bit. I was on all the time. So I was fortunate enough to be able to travel all the time with WCW and with WWF back then. I was able to travel a lot. And once they made the move down to Florida, which is where I was living, actually in the town I was living in, Orlando at the time, I was on all the time. Because I was no-brainer for them.
It was right there. It was your backyard, hardly any chance. But that's the good. The good is being busy. And we've talked about a lot of different things here on this show. We've highlighted, and Casey's gotten quite a bit of notoriety, quite a bit of attention over his direct interactions with Vader and with Sid and with Kevin Sullivan and with Danny Spivey and all the names that were part of that generation of enhancement matches on TV. We don't see those matches anymore, Casey. It's like that has completely left the wrestling sphere.
Yeah, what's the shame? I guess it's part of wrestling involving people. It changed before. They used those to build up for house shows. Now they're not doing any house shows. Everything is for TV now. They don't even care about the people in the crowd, which we've talked about that before, which is crazy. I've seen them sit there for 20 minutes at a time when they're doing all the backstage vignettes and pre-tapes. But yeah, it's all about TV now. It's a TV production.
We have seen, as of late, we've seen AEW use some enhancement talent, some locals, but it's not like it used to be. It certainly is not a revenue stream that you can count on. Yeah. And that was like your bread and butter. You were a full-time wrestler between doing shots for WWF and WCW, and then your own independent wrestling schedule. This was your full-time job, and you were wrestling, give or take, about 4 to 5 nights a week?
Correct. Yeah, 4 or 5 nights a week.
So one of the things that I wanted to dive into this week, and we've talked a lot about the physical here on the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast, this week I wanted to talk about the mental, because the mental side of it is as important, maybe even more important than the physical. But first, I want to invite everybody who is watching this, no matter where you are, first of all, thank you. Thanks for being part of the journey here on the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. The numbers continue to grow each and every week, and we're thankful for all of that. If you're watching on YouTube, it's easy. Just like, subscribe, and share. Make sure you subscribe and you hit that notification bell so when a new episode or a new short from the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast is available, you'll be the first to know, and you can jump right in. So, Casey, I wanted to talk about the mental side because I would imagine that there were times where you were busy, you were hopeful that there was going to be an opportunity. There would be opportunities that would go by the wayside. Where do I stand? Do I have heat? What's going on? How were you able to mentally handle the ups and downs of your professional wrestling career?
It was tough at times. Just like you're saying, one is you always constantly have to be on the phone, and it's just like anything. You get rejected so much trying to get another booking. Then you start wondering, man, is it me or what? So you just had to stay positive and it's a grind. It was not only just a grind because all the traveling, the bumps, everything you've done, trying to stay in shape. And, there's so much that goes into it besides, tanning. Just tanning alone is a whole thing. Because, WCW, everyone used a spray called hot stuff spray. I know I'm really off. Yeah, but when you go to WWF, Road Dogg, Brian Armstrong, was allergic to it, so it was banned from there.
Right.
So when I went up there, and hot stuff would take someone that's like a pale skinned person, you could spray it on and put baby oil on it. It's a vascular, it brings your veins and everything out, brings the blood to the surface. So it looks like you have color. And under the TV lights and baby oil, you look, pretty more vascular. You look tanner. When you go to WWF, it wasn't allowed. So
Right.
you would see guys with painting on tans like bodybuilders. I mean, in the locker, it was the craziest thing. So just tanning, always at the tanning bed. So you always keep yourself in shape. It was just a grind, always trying to keep yourself booked. You always had the old saying, out of sight, out of mind. It is so
Right.
true. So you're constantly on the phone reminding people who you were, and even if they knew who you were, you just had to just keep on almost pestering them to make sure that you got your spot up there because, like you said, it was a livelihood. So part of the livelihood was you keep the bookings coming, keep making the money, just keep traveling and living the dream, really.
Living the dream, but it has its cost because you are in your 20s and you're trying to make a go of it in professional wrestling and you're trying to get dates and have a social life outside of wrestling, trying to live some sense of normalcy. For example, when I was in WWF, and I'll tell you, like, one of the things that affected me the most is I was an employee as an announcer.
Mhm.
So that meant I didn't get residuals. It was the Jesse Ventura rule because he
Right.
sued the company and got $800,000 because he was on every pay-per-view but wasn't getting residuals. So they got around that with all of us by having us become employees, but that meant no residuals. Not that anybody was going to be buying the Kevin Kelly action figure and they weren't going to be making T-shirts. But the perk was, okay, so you get health care, great. You get vacation time, great.
Oh, wow.
Sick days. But when I was there, and I wasn't there very long, and Brooklyn Brawlers said, Chief Jay Strongbow said to me, you never take a day off. There is no sick.
I was
And
going
you
to
never
ask you
take a
that.
day. Yeah. You never take a day off. You never miss TV because somebody will pass you by.
Exactly what I
Somebody
was
will
going
take
to
your
ask
spot.
you. As an announcer, as a wrestler, if you were hurt, you still wrestled because if you're not there, someone else is going to take your spot. So
Right.
was it the same way as an employee, as an announcer? Is that the mindset you guys had? That if I
It's the
missed,
mindset I had.
yeah, if you take vacation, they're going to use somebody else. They might, not that they're better, but they might see something in them and be like, oh, we're going to have this guy do it instead of Kevin. So did
Right.
you plan your vacations around all that stuff too?
There were no vacations, Chase. Hey, Casey. There were no vacations. That's the
Wow.
problem. And so my wife and my young son, because we got moved from Florida to Connecticut for the job, that
Ooh.
was the other thing. So I had to move to Connecticut. That was part of the deal. Now, not Connecticut necessarily. I could have lived in New Jersey. I could have lived in New York
You just had to be able
because
to
drive,
commute. Right.
be available. They were not going to fly me every week up and down from Florida to, New York City and then back to Florida like they used to do with Gene Okerlund and Bobby Heenan and those guys because, again, the business was down and the company was not making money. I signed up for this. I said, okay. My first contract was for $75,000. $75,000 for a guy that was making $750 a week, working two jobs in Florida, sounded like a lot of money in the early part of 1996.
Then the
I'm
cost
in
of living in
Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Well, yeah. So I'm there 3 days, and I see the Connecticut Sun newspaper, and the headline reads, median household income in Fairfield County crosses $100,000 barrier. I'm not even in the middle.
Oh, man.
I went from being, okay in Florida to being less than okay in Connecticut. But I was living the dream. It's hard mentally. Now,
Right.
add that you and I have the same mental problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're physically exerting yourself. I'm just mentally exerting myself. I'm just worried about my job. You're worried about your job, and you have to train, and the taking bumps, and the getting bookings. You had to hustle to get work every week. It's no wonder that, wrestlers are crazy, and they took drugs to adjust to it, to adapt to it. It's like nobody talks about that and all the improvements in the business, and there have been improvements, and we could talk about that as well. Did you ever, want to quit? Did you ever want to just check out and say, I'm not doing this anymore?
I never wanted to quit per se, because as like so many other people before me, that was my dream. That's what I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to do. I wanted to be a professional wrestler. So once I achieved that, and of course you want to keep growing and getting bigger and bigger. You want to eventually get figured in. and you do whatever it takes, and there's no putting on the brakes until something like that happens. I had my days where I was just like, man, I'm just over this. It's a never end battle. But then you see guys that out of nowhere just get a job instantly just because of their look or whatever, right place, right time. Sometimes I swear it didn't matter if they could work or not. It's just something pops in their head, and it's like, oh, the first person I see, they got a job.
Yeah.
There's no rhyme or reason to it.
It's again a thankless business that cares not for you or your happiness. On the other side too of the mental, and you talked about being on the phone and trying to get opportunities. We would hear all the time of opportunities that would be coming up. And of course, we both grew up in the era of believe nothing that you hear and half of what you see. Tell me some stories about that. Some lucrative tours that you were offered that just disappeared and, never came to
Oh
be.
man, do we have enough time for that? Let's see. A really good one is I got booked for a tour in the Bahamas by Dory Funk Jr.
Okay.
Myself and the guy who trained me, Jerry Gray. And, Jerry knew Dory very well. So everything was good. We're like, all right, no plane flight yet. So we're waiting and nothing happens. And Jerry's like, I don't know. Of course, you have to realize Dory was probably borderline senile at the time. And this is a long time ago.
I know. This was in the early 90s. And yeah.
So he called us afterwards and was mad because we weren't there. And we're like, Dory, you didn't send us any of the no information, no nothing. You just booked us. He's like, oh, okay. That I've had tours to the Middle East, Pakistan, where you worked on it and everything's locked in and the last second. My whole thing is, my belief is I don't believe anything until it's already happened, because you never know. I mean, you could be right there and things just change. You're like, nope, we're done. Close the doors, turn off the TV, turn off the lights, kick the people out, and you could be on deck ready to wrestle. So my whole thing is I didn't believe it. I mean, and the problem is that there's so many opportunities and so many people that were putting things together. And yeah, you have your shysters and scammers and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is, it's like throwing something against the wall and seeing what sticks. You can't pass an opportunity or a potential opportunity because it could be the one that was the real one. So,
could be the one.
Yeah, there was so much BS that was put in there. I'll give you an example. Rocky Johnson, The Rock's dad. He was running the Urban Wrestling. It was on BET.
Oh,
Urban Wrestling.
I remember that.
So they had interviews and brought people in, and I was really good friends with Rocky. I was around him all the time down in South Florida in Davie, where he had a real wrestling school. Honestly, I think they gave him a ring to try to keep him out of trouble. Rocky would do a lot of stupid stuff. Not that he was malice or he was just being Rocky's Rocky. I'll give you an example. We were friends with the mayor of the city there, Mayor of Davie. And we go to his house, and we're leaving through the garage, and Rocky steals his son's fishing pole. It's like 10-year-old son's fishing pole. It's like, Rocky, put that back. It's not yours. And it was myself and Orlando Jordan who, I like to say, babysit Rocky. And I think it was to keep him out of trouble where it didn't make Dwayne look bad. And of course, it lasted a while and I bowed out finally. I was like, I'm done. I can't do this no more. We'd go out to eat with Rocky and his wife, The Rock's mom, just like somewhere simple, Waffle House.
Okay.
That's all the workers' favorite restaurant,
Every wrestler's favorite restaurant, Waffle House.
So we go there and he's like, oh, don't leave the tip on the table. Don't leave the tip on the table, right? And all of a sudden, it's like the tip's not on the table. Give it to me. And all of a sudden, Rocky doesn't leave it. He's keeping it in his spot. I'm like, Rocky, put the tip on the table. Or he would talk to the waitress, trying to get something free and say, oh, I have my son, The Rock, come in and give you an autograph or something like this. It's not that he was a bad person, because I loved being around Rocky. It was so much fun. I never laughed so much in my life. But back in the territory days, they lived sort of like gypsies from town to town. And so that's the mentality, even though his son has already bought him a house and gave them $1 million and all that. Rocky still lived that same mentality. I guess once it's in you, you don't get rid of it, Sort of like the wrestling bug. Once you become a wrestler, you never retire.
We're not insulting the gypsies. at
No,
all,
no, not at
because
all.
but the and the common phraseology for wrestlers like Rocky and his generation was carny. That's how they got over on people.
Mhm.
That's how they live their lives. Jimmy Valiant, who has a great reputation, fans would come up to him and ask for an autograph, and he would say, I've got 8x10s in the trunk of my car. Give me a second, Daddy. I'll take it out. Hey, by the way, as he's autographing the picture, by the way, I don't charge for autographs, but I take $10 donations. And I give the $10 to the orphanage that helped raise me, or whatever the story was. And the person would reach in their pocket and hand him $10, thankfully, and take the picture and say, wow, I just got a picture from Jimmy Valiant. And of course, the 10 would go right in his pocket. But that's the way they live.
So going back to Rocky with the Urban Wrestling Federation on BET, it was actually going on already. They brought Rocky in probably because The Rock was his dad.
Sure.
And so Rocky was bringing in some of us white guys that's going to be the heels, naturally. And so he brought in, they had a hotel. I'm just telling you what it is. I'm not making this up.
Oh,
and
God.
So they had a whole hotel, all rooms for everyone. We're up there. They're interviewing us. And so they decided to put myself and Mike Modest together as a tag team, sort of like a Road Warriors 2.0 kind of thing, which was cool. Mike was a great guy, great worker and everything. And so they're talking to us, sketching out wardrobe, and all of a sudden just like silence. It's just like it went away after a few months. Don't know what the backstory was. That's one of the examples of something that I was figured in almost on a national broadcast.
But there had to be a lingering thought in your mind, like there's something just not kosher with this. There's just something not right about this whole deal. It just didn't it? Because I remember that thing, and everybody sort of going, "What? Urban Wrestling Federation? I don't know." For all the stuff that we had heard of. And again, and you shared the link with me, all the defunct wrestling organizations from the 90s, from the IWF, of course, and then Paul Alperstein's AWF, which was one of the more well-known ventures, and going back before that, Herb Abrams and the UWF, and before that, Eddie Einhorn and the IWF, or what did they call that? Was it the IWA?
Mm-hmm.
And all the different groups, all the different opportunities, and a lot of times it was the same people that were involved, and for one reason or another, deals would go sideways, and then guys like Casey Thompson would be left going, well, what do I do now?
Well, part of the problem is a lot of those things happen, and they look at it. The boys that are involved in it are always looking for a money mark. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking for a quick payday instead of longevity. And what happens is that affects the boys. Whoever starting up a new project, they're getting the first kickback and making all the money, and then they try to make it look like they're doing something and nothing happens, but they get a payday out of it. So it's very shallow-minded instead of longevity. Whenever I did something, I always try to look for longevity, something that would be last for a long time. That way there'll be work for the boys for a while. But
you could easily ask for $2,000 a week, but you could also ask for $1,000 a week to run the thing, and then you'd be able to, in theory, hire two for $500 a week. But most of the time, guys would say, "No, I need two. Well, actually, I need $2,500 a week." And of course, the money mark, being a fan of the wrestler from his childhood, would fork over the money, and then the wrestler would say, "Well, I need to bring in this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy." And now all of a sudden, the old joke: how are you a millionaire in wrestling? Well, you start with $2 million. Because nothing will bankrupt you quicker than trying to start up a television production.
So it was exactly like you just said a second ago, Kevin. When we started MXPW, it was me. We had a money man, which happens to be a really good friend of mine, close friend of mine to this day, and D'Lo Brown. And D'Lo was booking everyone from TNA. And I'm like, of course, I was butting heads the whole time because I'm like, hey, the TNA guys aren't drawing at all. What do you think they're going to do down here in South Florida? So he got his way. The payroll was astronomical. We had everyone you could think of in the world. So that happened for a couple shows. And then we had a show at the War Memorial Auditorium, which is a big wrestling building in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. D'Lo was booked on it. And I knew and he had another booking at the same time, so I knew he wasn't going to show up. And that was
Ah,
that was the end of D'Lo. He kind of went away.
got it.
So I restructured everything, and I kept some of these stars, and then I used top independent guys and just built them up. So what I was doing is I was building longevity. I wasn't spending all the money trying to get it right off at the beginning. I was trying to make it last for all the boys. And it did. It lasted for a
Right.
couple years.
And you knew, yeah. And I was the
Yep.
announcer, and it was working,
Yep.
no doubt about it, because the crowds didn't change. The crowds were consistent,
Mhm.
and you knew it wasn't just like now all of a sudden Casey's grabbing names out of thin air. You were active in the scene,
Right.
and you knew good guys to bring in and ways to shape them and ways to mold them. You changed some people and you put some people together that hadn't been together.
Right.
And you began to get this thing up and running and rolling.
Yep.
And the money situation was legit because the guy's as legit as can be that was behind it.
Oh, yeah.
And the only thing that changed, what was the inevitable thing where you guys just said, okay, time out, we're going to put a pin in this and revisit it?
I think it's just legal things
Ah.
that I mean, we did come back. We did that really, really great Lords of the Ring tag team tournament.
That was awesome.
That we had every top independent, not even independent, or a lot of great tag teams in there. Guys that made it big in wrestling.
Yeah, you had Homicide and Low Key. You had the Briscoes.
Yeah.
Those are just the two. Trent Acid.
Yeah.
You had the Backseat Boys. Oh, my God. Trent Acid was so freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Do you remember the things that we were talking about with him?
Oh.
The ideas that we were kicking around with what we wanted to do?
Yeah.
That's a whole episode in and of itself. We could get into
I
that.
had a whole episode driving the Briscoes to the airport the next morning. The funny thing is, I didn't know a lot about the Briscoes. And listen, they're great guys. The way you explained them to me and everything. And so real quick, we're in the back. I'm driving them to the airport the next morning, and
Right.
one of them opens the Snapple can, and there's on the Snapple they always had like a message inside the lid, right? So he's reading it. He's like, "Well, I'll be." And whatever the message was, the grass is green outside, or the grass is red outside. And he's like, well, it's on the Snapple lid, so it's got to be a truth. It's got to be a fact. It was literally the funniest time I've ever had in a car.
So then I lived that every week in Ring of Honor for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
With Jamin, God rest his soul, getting beyond hammered, and his alter ego would come out, and he was not a nice person.
Oh, wow.
And Mark, who was just trying to sit there taking the abuse from his older brother, as we're on the rental car shuttle and we're about to get thrown out and have to walk. So that was every week.
Oh, wow.
But God bless him. And again, so all of these things add up mentally. The ups and downs of professional wrestling, and people just write it off like, oh, it's no big deal. No, man, it is a big deal because it's your life. It's your rent.
Yeah.
It's how am I going to do this? What am I doing? Am I going to just go get a regular job? I need to get out of this, but I love it so much. What was like, were you ever like at a mental breaking point where you said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. F this. I'm going to go, work I'll go get a construction job. I'll go get my college degree.
Well,
I can't do this anymore.
I was, unlike a lot of the other guys, I would still always have like a side job to, as they say, to support your wrestling habit. Even though I was making money wrestling, I always worked too. If I was home 3 days a week, I was working 3 days a week. If I was home for some reason a week off, I'd work a week. And I had employers that would allow me the flexibility to travel and chase my dream. Well, a lot of the guys, they wouldn't do nothing. I always worked. But yeah, I got to the point, like I told you before, when I had my son, I went out of the country and I was just done. That was my breaking point because, like I said before, I've seen so many wrestlers that were fathers that have no relationship with their kids. And I was new to being a father, but I knew that that's not what I wanted. My father was a great father, was there involved in everything I did. He took me to my first wrestling practice when I was 15 years old and was supportive behind it. My mom was supportive by it. The only thing she didn't like me do was the color, you're juicing again.
Yeah.
I'd come home and hide the clothes because they're all bloody and stuff like that. But I knew that's how, if I was going to be a father, I had to be totally in. And I have no regrets at all. I have two incredible kids. I spoke to both of them this morning before we started recording and everything. They're 20 and 21. So I have no remorse of my wrestling. There's a lot of bitter people out there. I have nothing to be bitter about. I was in the ring with some of the greatest wrestlers of all times. I have relationships with people that were my childhood heroes. I'm content with what I did. Then I went into the role of trying to help people, help them get to the next level through the promotion I had, my experiences, my contacts. A bunch of guys would send the WF and MXPW TV tape, try to get it working. I've had Tommy Dreamer call me to ask about the people because I know Dreamer. And so I never got to that breaking point, but my breaking point was when I had kids, and
Right.
I don't regret that whatsoever.
Do you think a lot of guys use drugs to cope with the ups and downs of the emotions of wrestling?
Sure. If they are telling you they don't, they're lying to you. There's not very many guys that weren't doing drugs at some level, some degree. I was like the cleanest person of everyone in my era. I didn't really do a lot. I never drank in my life. I was the one who made sure we made it to the next town. There always has to be one responsible person in the car.
Yeah, I was the designated driver quite a bit too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was always okay because people look at it and they glorify it and they romanticize about it. And they say, oh, they're just living the rock and roll life. Yeah, to some extent. But then there's also the coping mechanisms and dealing with the depression and being away from the family. I was an employee, like I said earlier on, and I had the benefits and I had all of that. But I also had a wife and a 1-year-old son, and I didn't get to see much of my son growing up. I mean, I was there for some things.
That can cause a lot of mental problems.
Yes, that's it. It's so much of it, and you want to have a normal life, and you want to be and you want to enjoy your success, whatever that may be. But yet, you could never get away from wrestling. You can never shut it off. You're always on the phone. You're always doing something, and it's like all of a sudden now it's 11:30, and you didn't say goodnight to your son because you were on the phone, or you got home late. Because you were at the studio late because you wanted to be there. Here's how bad it was. I wanted to prove that when they announced SmackDown, and it was really between me and Michael Cole to be the announcers of SmackDown. New show starting off, and I thought I was in a good spot, but it went to Michael Cole, and nothing against him at all. Coin flip. Choose either one of us, it's fine. But it affected me a lot because I didn't get that job. And they would record the voiceovers of SmackDown in the middle of the night the next day. So taped on Tuesday, come back, fly to Stamford, they'd start to edit the show, and then maybe about midnight or so, they would begin on Wednesday night, they would begin the voiceovers, and it would take a couple, 3 hours to get done. Then the crew posts the show, and they would satellite it out early Wednesday morning for Thursday airing. So I decided I'm going to sit in on these voiceover sessions. I'm not doing any work, but I'm sitting in. And because I wanted to learn, because Paul Heyman was producing. He was producing Taz and Michael Cole.
Okay.
I can learn something from these guys. And I did. I learned quite a bit. And I was doing that every week for months and months and months. And then after a while, it got to be like, Kevin, you're making some people uncomfortable by being here. Because I think Michael Cole kind of felt like I was angling for his job. I just wanted to get better.
Right.
Because I was like, okay, I didn't get picked. So that was just more time away. And that's more time I'm giving up with my family. I could have been home. I could have been sleeping in my bed next to my wife, having a normal life. But
what people don't what people don't realize is every other sport has a season. Football, they got a season. Baseball, basketball, every sport has a season. Professional wrestling, it's year round. It doesn't stop. You don't get that time off where you get to just unwind and relax and step away. Yeah, it's definitely the mental part of wrestling is brutal. It's just everyone copes with it a different way. Some people drink, some people do drugs, just like we were talking about. And it's a reality.
I think that's a good place to put a pin in today's conversation, and we can revisit it, of course, down the road. I think there are a lot of changes, and there are efforts to make improvements in the wrestling industry. Whether or not they're actualized, I'm not sure, because I know that was a lot of talk in AEW. They had staff psychiatrists. And, of course, I was working with one and was talking with one when I was desperate and I was sad and I was ready to end it all. And then they fired me on Wednesday. So, you know what I mean? It's like, what do you do? But we'll put a pin in that there. Yeah. Do we have are we going to have a guest next week? Because I think it's about time that we have a special guest.
Yep, I'm working on it right now. and we will post something as soon as I lock him in, because we definitely want to hear everyone's questions they might want. So we'll have it out there, and
Right. So once we lock down the guest, we'll give you the opportunity, you the viewer, the loyal follower of us here on the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast, give you the opportunity to submit questions for our special guest, and we will make that announcement when everything is locked in. And again, if it doesn't happen on our next episode, it'll happen on the following episode.
Oh, definitely.
We'll make it happen.
Yep.
And this is a name we've discussed here on this show, and I think we're going to learn a lot of insight from being in ring when the Stars music hits. So Casey, of course, it's a new year. Have there been any new resolutions made for 2025?
No, I stopped making resolutions a long time ago. My only resolution is to keep grinding on this podcast and make it successful. We get out there for everyone to hear it, get entertained, learn something new about the wrestling business, and maybe we can find the next person that falls in love with the business and does something, and maybe we might have a little small part in that.
Every time I get a note about this show, whether somebody sends me a Facebook message on my Kevin Kelly page or on Twitter at Real Kevin Kelly, thank you for doing this, and I never knew this, I learned this, and that's the reason why we're doing this. We're just giving insight to people to a world that they never experienced. They knew was there, they've heard about it, or they remember watching it, but they didn't know the ins and outs, they didn't know the details, and they're really starting to pick this up. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X, everywhere, YouTube, Spotify, Apple. There's every avenue for everybody to enjoy, whether it's just the audio version, video version, the shorts, the whatevers. Each and every week, we're going to bring you content here, and it's enjoyable. I love doing this, Casey. I'm sick as a dog today, and I wouldn't go miss this for the world. But again, we will see everybody next week for the next episode of the In-Ring Wrestling Podcast. For Casey Thompson, I'm Kevin Kelly. We'll see you next time.